Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron, and we're here today with another edition of Much Abrew About Nothing. So a couple of weeks ago I was playing Budget Magic, we were playing Mono Black Infect, and I accidentally loaded Mono Black Eldrazi, since they're right next to each other in my Moto collection, and I posted one of the videos and people seemed to really like it. So I figured that Much Abrew About Nothing would be a perfect place to showcase the modern Eldrazi deck. So right now in Modern, there are a ton of different builds of this Eldrazi deck. There's a mono-black build without Heartless Summoning, black-white build, splashes for Path and Lingering Souls, a black-red build, splashes for Artifact Destruction and Lightning Bolt, a black-blue build, which plays Sire of Stagnation and counter spells. I saw a black-green build one time, and then there's this build, which is basically the all-in combo build of Eldrazi. Those other decks are kind of controlling, built around interaction. They have Wasteland Stranglers and Blight Herders, and then eventually they finish off the game with Oblivion Sowers and Ulamogs. Our deck is just a million things that add 2 mana. From our lands to our creatures to our enchantments, and we try to play an Oblivion Sower or Conduit of Ruin on turn 3, and a Ulamog on turn 4 as consistently as possible, and we hope that that is good enough. Anyway, let's talk about the deck. We have 16 creatures, all of them Eldrazi. The first 2 are to facilitate our Ulamog plan, actually even Oblivion Sower, but Kozilek's Channeler, 5 mana 4/4, Eldrazi, taps to add 2 mana. Obviously, adding 2 mana is key to casting early Ulamogs. Conduit of Ruin is oddly similar, even though it's worded way differently. It is a 6 mana 5/5. When we cast it, we get to search for an Ulamog. Actually, any colorless creature card with converted mana cost 7 or greater. But in our deck, that's always Ulamog. Put it on top of our library, and then we get to draw that our next turn. So it tutors up an Ulamog. And it also has the second ability where the first creature we cast each turn costs 2 less. So essentially, it is also adding 2 mana towards Ulamog. Oblivion Sower, such a good card, 6 mana for a 5/8. When it enters the battlefield, we exile the top 4 cards of our opponent's library. Then we get to play any number of lands from their exile zone. So usually we hit a couple of lands, so Oblivion Sower also adds 2 mana towards our Ulamog. So all of our creatures are designed to come down on turn 3 with our lands that we'll talk about and our Heartless Summoning that we'll talk about next, and add 2 mana, which allows us to play another 2 mana land and play Ulamog on turn 4. And then Ulamog, of course, itself, 10 mana 10/10. When we cast it, we get to exile 2 permanents, which on turn 4 is super devastating. Usually hits 2 lands, but can also hit creatures if there's creatures around. Has Indestructible, so pretty much only dies to Path to Exile out of the commonly played cards in Modern. And whenever it attacks, you get to exile 20 cards from your opponent's library. So it pretty much wins in 2 attacks usually, even through chump blockers, any number of chump blockers, because of the exiling ability. Sometimes it takes 3 turns, typically 2 attacks from Ulamog gets it done. And that's assuming our opponent just doesn't scoop in response to us casting Ulamog. Then we have the key part of this deck, all these cards, these cheap cards, these lands that essentially add 2 mana to cast our Ulamogs and our other Eldrazi's. The unique card to this build is Heartless Summoning. All the builds play 4 Eldrazi temples. Most of them play 2 to 4 copies of Ayavugan, but we're pretty much the only one, I think, that's playing Heartless Summoning. So Heartless Summoning is a 2 mana black enchantment. Creature spells cost 2 less to cast, so there you go, another way to cast Ulamog for 2 less mana. And creatures we control get -1/-1. So basically, with Heartless Summoning on the battlefield, our Ulamog costs 8, our Oblivion Sowers and Conduits of Ruin cost 4, etc. The creatures you control get -1/-1 is intended to be a drawback, but in our deck, it just really doesn't matter. And 9/9 Ulamog is basically just as good as a 10/10 Ulamog. A 4/7 Oblivion Sower isn't significantly worse than a 5/8 Oblivion Sower. So even though it is a drawback, it's not much of a drawback. Basically, it's just another way that we can cast Conduit of Ruin and Oblivion Sower on turn 3 into Ulamog on turn 4. Eldrazi Temple adds a colorless, or it adds 2 mana to cast Eldrazi spells. Since all of our creatures are Eldrazi, it does a pretty good approximation of an Ancient Tomb or any soul land that just taps for 2 mana. Ayavugan is basically like Heartless Summoning on a land. Colorless Eldrazi spells we cast 2 less. And we can pay 7 and search for a colorless creature card, tap it, and search for a colorless creature card and put it in our hand. Urborg is on here just because it works so well with Eye of Ugin. Urborg makes all of our lands into swamps, which is nice for casting all of our black spells since we have a bunch of colorless lands. But it turns all of our lands into swamps, allows Eye of Ugin to tap for mana. So Eye of Ugin essentially adds 3 mana towards Eldrazi spells when we have an Urborg on the battlefield. So any combination of 3 of these cards allow us to cast our 6-drops on turn 3, and then another one allows us to cast our Ulamog on turn 4. So this package of cards, our deck is built to maximize the likelihood of us having our 6-drops on turn 3 and then our Ulamog on turn 4. That is the entire theme of the deck, from the non-Ulamog creatures to our lands to our Heartless Summoning. That's what our deck's trying to do. And when we can pull that off, we really don't care what our opponent's doing. Then we have Expedition Map. Works well with our plan because it can find whatever land we're missing. 1 mana artifact, pay 2, sacrifice it, you could search for a land. So we play an Eldrazi Temple on turn 1, play Expedition Map. On turn 2, we can play our Urborg, and then sack the Expedition Map to find the Eye of Ugin. Then on turn 3, we'll have the 6 mana we need, so forth. All is Dust is a really sweet one. We can use the mana from both Eldrazi Temple and the discount from Eye of Ugin to cast it. So it kind of becomes, in our deck, like a 4 mana or 3 mana or 5 mana, depending on the situation. One-sided Wrath. It's just like an absurd card. And then the rest of our interaction, we have 7 discard spells, 4 Thought Seizes and 3 Inquisitions, and then 2 copies of Go for the Throat, which we can use to take care of whatever creatures might be troubling us. It's very unconditional since it destroys target non-artifact creature, and there's not that many artifact creatures outside of like Affinity that you really want to kill in Modern. So that is the non-land cards in the main deck. Mana-wise, just to rehash, we're not going to go into them in depth again. 4 Eldrazi Temples, 4 Eye of Ugins, 4 Urborgs. I did want to say, though, that this part of the mana base is one of the weaknesses of the deck. Eye of Ugin and Urborg are both legendary, so one of the ways our deck can lose is drawing multiple copies of either of those, since we can only have 1 on the battlefield at a time. But these lands are so important that it is worth those clunky draws because of how powerful they are. We want to maximize our odds of having them on the first 3 turns of the game. The rest of the mana base, 2 Ghost Quarters, really good in the mirror, can answer a Tron land. It's just a good utility land, and we kind of get to play colorless lands for free since we have 4 Urborgs, so it's usually going to be adding black mana anyway because of the Urborgs. 2 Mortuary Mires, enters the battlefield tap, adds a black mana, and when it enters the battlefield, we can put a creature from our graveyard on top of our library. So if our opponent kills an Oblivion Soul or a Conduit of Ruin, we can kind of get it back with Mortuary Mire if we want to. Also, it's a May ability, so we don't have to put a creature on top of our library if we don't feel like it or if it's not good in the situation. 3 Sanctum of Ugins, adds a colorless. Whenever we cast a colorless spell with converted mana cost 7 or greater, we can sack it and search for a colorless creature card and put it in our hand. Most often what this is we cast an Ulamog, we sack our Sanctum of Ugin, get another Ulamog in our hand, so the next turn we can attack with our Ulamog, exile the 20 cards, probably getting some damage, then Legend Rule ourselves by casting the second Ulamog, exile 2 more permanents, and just exile our opponent out of the game. And then the funniest card in the deck, Shizo Death Storehouse. So it's a legendary land. It enters the battlefield untapped, adds a black mana. So the opportunity cost is incredibly low. It's aside from Blood Moon or other things that affect non-basic lands, it is basically just a swamp. But we can pay 1 and tap it and give a legendary creature fear until end of turn. So in our deck, that means giving our Ulamog fear. And it seems a little win more. It's not often that I sit around thinking, man, if only I could make my Ulamog unblockable, I'd win this game. But hey, it's basically free to play in our deck, so why not run one of them? So that's the main deck. Oh yes, 5 swamps, of course, just the basic lands. But that's the main deck. Sideboard-wise, we got 3 copies of Duress, some more discard, 4 copies of Pithing Needle, 2 Relics of Progenitus, deals with the graveyard, 3 Languish. Languish is a sweet one. When I first saw this, I was like, well, shouldn't this be Damnation? Like, why is this a budget choice? Why would you play Languish over Damnation? But actually, Languish kind of becomes another one-sided Plague Wind type card, because most of our creatures, actually all of them except Kozilek's Channeler, survive a Languish, but most other creatures do not. So typically we can use this to wipe our opponent's board, but still leave our creatures alive, which is, I'm assuming, the reason why it's in the deck over Damnation. 2 more Go for the Throats, some more early interaction, and another Murderous Cut. So that's the deck. I played 2 leagues with it, and the videos are a conglomeration of those 2 leagues. Overall, the record was okay. It was, I think, 4-6, which isn't really exciting. It struggles with things like Infect. We don't have good answers for that. 2 of my losses were to Infect. Another one was to, like, Eggs combo. Those are some of the things that we just don't have a lot of good answers for. We don't have good ways of dealing with faster combo decks, which I would consider Infect. We don't have a good way of dealing with Burn. We don't really have a good way of dealing with heavy artifact decks. We can't just kill an artifact. So there are some weaknesses, but this deck, it's going to crush mid-rangey decks. It's going to crush Jund and Abzan and Kiki Cord and things like that, like slower combo decks. It's even not horrible against like Scapeshift and so on, because we can typically get our Ulamog chain going before they can really start going off. And since our Ulamogs and Oblivion Sowers trigger when they're cast, we don't even especially care if they get hit by a remand. Actually, sometimes it's good when they get hit by a remand because we get to recast them the next turn. So we have good matchups against control, mid-range, those type of decks, but we struggle with aggro and we struggle with fast combo. I don't know. We have the discard to kind of fight combo decks, but I don't think it's a great matchup. So overall, this is a cool version of the deck, and I'm sure I lost some points just by not being familiar with it. But I don't know. It didn't strike me as obviously clearly better than the versions that are playing Wasteland Strangler and main deck Relics of Progenitus and Blight Herders, the more mid-rangey, less all-in versions. So I think it's worth trying, though, and I think that Heartless Summoning might have a home in Eldrazi builds, because it basically works like another Soul Land, and the drawback is negligible. So I think I'm really excited to see what happens in a couple weeks at the Pro Tour. I think that's going to be the defining moment for these Eldrazi decks, is what builds show up at the Pro Tour. Are people playing Heartless Summoning? Are they splashing white? Are they splashing blue or green or red? What new cards from Oath of the Gatewatch show up? So I think right now we're in this weird period where the Eldrazi decks are very wide open and people are trying lots of different versions, and I think that focus will narrow in on 1 or 2 builds once we see what shows up at the Pro Tour in a couple weeks from now. Anyway, make sure to check out the website, mtggoldfish.com. That's where you'll find the article for this Much Abrew About Nothing, decks, prices, metagame strategy, tons of articles and content by other people and myself as well. And if you enjoyed the video, make sure to click the subscribe button that's going to pop up on the bottom of your screen. Anyway, thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoy the Heartless Eldrazi videos for Modern, and I will talk to you soon.